In July 1972, as dawn broke over the Omani coast, more than 250 heavily armed communist insurgents descended on the small town of Mirbat. Standing in their way were just 9 SAS troopers and a handful of local allies in an old fort. What followed has been called a modern-day Rorke's Drift. 4 hours of desperate fighting that would determine the fate of a nation and the future of the Gulf. This is the extraordinary story of Sergeant Labalaba's lone stand operating a 25-pounder gun, Captain Keeley's calm leadership under fire, and how British professionalism and raw courage held the line when everything hung in the balance. Hi, this is a little bit different to usual. It's a little bit more modern than a lot of my other stories, but loads of you have requested it, so I really hope you enjoy it. The Battle of Mirbat, 1972. The British SAS's modern-day Rorke's Drift. In the early 1960s, Oman, situated on the eastern edge of the Arabian Peninsula, was one of the most isolated and underdeveloped countries in the world. Ruled by Sultan Saeed bin Taimur, a reclusive and ultra-conservative monarch, the country was trapped in the past. There were no cinemas, no newspapers, barely any roads. Only a handful of schools existed, and education for girls was virtually non-existent. Medical facilities were primitive, and in rural areas, life was much as it had been for centuries. It was in this stifled environment that discontent began to fester, particularly in the southern province of Dhofar. This rugged mountainous region bordered the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, or South Yemen, a newly established Marxist state, previously the British Protectorate of Aden. The region was poor, underdeveloped, and largely ignored by the central government in Muscat, and deep-seated tribal rivalries, economic hardship, and a strong sense of regional identity made Dhofar fertile ground for rebellion. In 1962, this frustration gave rise to the Dhofar Liberation Front, DLF, a small band of rebels seeking greater autonomy for the region. But within a few years, the movement evolved into something much more dangerous. By the late 1960s, the DLF had become the Popular Front for the liberation of the occupied Arabian Gulf, the PFL-OAG, later shortened to PFLO. Influenced by Maoist and Marxist-Leninist ideology, the group's goals were no longer merely local. They now sought to overthrow the Sultan, install a communist regime, and export revolution throughout the Arabian Peninsula. Support for the insurgents came quickly from South Yemen, itself backed by Soviet Union, China, East Germany and Cuba. Rebels received training in guerrilla tactics, sabotage and political indoctrination. Arms shipments included AK-47s, RPGs, mortars, landmines and even Soviet anti-aircraft guns. Some fighters were sent abroad for training, and women were included in the ranks, a significant departure from traditional tribal norms. At its peak in the early 1970s, the insurgents controlled large swathes of the Dhofar region and operated from secure bases across the Yemeni border. Rebel fighters ambushed convoys, attacked garrisons, and assassinated tribal leaders loyal to the Sultan. The Sultan's army, small and poorly trained, struggled to respond. And as the rebellion spread, fears grew among Western governments. If Oman fell to communism, the strategic Strait of Hormuz, the vital oil route in the Persian Gulf, would be compromised. Moreover, in a classic domino theory, the revolution could spread to the neighbouring United Arab Emirates, and from there, well, who knew? British officials who still maintained strong ties with Oman realised something needs to change. That change came in 1970, when Sultan Saeed was overthrown in a bloodless coup orchestrated by his own son, Qaboos bin Saeed, with British support. Young, Western-educated and pragmatic, Sultan Qaboos embarked on an ambitious campaign to modernise Oman and crush the insurgency. His reforms included expanding education, building roads and clinics, and increasing the size and professionalism of the armed forces. Crucially, he also secured the support of several regional and international allies. Among them were Jordan, which provided skilled military trainers and officers to help reform Oman's armed forces, and Iran, then under the rule of the pro-Western Shah. Now, this was a time before the Islamic Revolution in 1979, and Iran was at the time a key ally of Britain and the United States in the Gulf. The Shah, viewing the communist insurgency in Oman as a threat to regional stability and to his own regime, committed several thousand Iranian troops to assist in the counter-insurgency operations. These external contributions bolstered Oman's military capability and strengthened Sultan Qaboos' hand in fighting against the PFLO. But behind the scenes, the young Sultan was also receiving British support. Rather than deploying large conventional forces, the UK mainly covertly provided elite troops, special advisors, and critical support services. Foremost among these was the 22nd Special Air Service Regiment, the SAS. And their mission was to live alongside the Dhofari tribes, train and command small local militias known as feats, and provide tactical intelligence and expertise in irregular warfare. The SAS introduced what they called Jebel warfare, operating deep in the rugged mountains where the PFLO was strongest. They established remote observation posts, conducted ambushes, and launched raids on insurgent camps. Their presence also helped establish trust with the local communities, many of whom had previously sympathised with the rebels. The SAS's role was mirrored by the British Army training teams, BATs, Royal Engineers, RAF personnel, and medical units, all playing vital parts in stabilising the region. By 1972, the Sultan's armed forces, with that input from Jordan, Iran, and the British, had grown significantly in strength and capability. The regular army now included between 6,000 and 7,000 men, comprising infantry, artillery, and mechanised units. Supporting them were 2,000 to 2,500 Firkat fighters, formerly rebels now fighting for the government, trained and led by the SAS. Meanwhile, the Royal Air Force of Oman, bolstered by British-supplied aircraft and foreign personnel, had several hundred members and provided essential reconnaissance and close air support. Omani artillery and air power began to dominate key supply routes and mountain passes. Iranian and Omani offensives pushed deep into PFLO territory, seizing high ground and breaking up rebel concentrations. Meanwhile, civil development projects, funded and overseen by the Sultan's new administration, began to change the lives of ordinary Dhofaris. Roads, wells, schools and medical clinics were built in previously neglected areas, creating a visible and tangible benefit for communities that once sided with the insurgents. The tide was turning. By mid-1972, desertions from the PFLO were increasing. Rebel morale had begun to falter, particularly as local support ebbed away and supply lines from South Yemen were disrupted. And it was against this backdrop of shifting momentum that the communist insurgents made a bold move, launching a large-scale attack on the coastal town of Mirbat. What followed would become one of the most extraordinary and heroic engagements in the history of Britain's special forces. Mirbat is a sleepy fishing town nestled on Oman's southern coast. In 1972, it served as one of several British Omani outposts projecting influence along the coast. Its small fort, built in the 19th century, doubled as a garrison and a civil outreach base. The PFLO saw Mirbat as a strategic target. Capturing the town would allow them to strike a symbolic blow that they were still very much alive and kicking, open up the port as a supply route, and potentially destabilise the entire Dhofar region. It was also lightly defended, or so they believed. At dawn on the 19th of July 1972, 250, although some sources claim up to 400, heavily armed rebel fighters descended from the hills. Their attack was launched under the cover of darkness with the intent of achieving total surprise. Inside Mirbat that morning were 9 men from B Squadron 22 SAS, under the command of Captain Mike Keeley. Apart from an intelligence officer, they were the sole British military presence in the coastal town. Also present were approximately 30 Omani soldiers, about 24 local police or gendarmerie, and about 30 Pakistani troops. Apart from the SAS, the most experienced troops garrisoned in Mirbat were about 50 to 60 Firkat fighters, but unfortunately they were on patrol up in the mountains that morning. The Omani troops present were of mixed fighting experience, whilst the gendarmerie were more accustomed to policing duties. Meanwhile, the Pakistani troops were from admin functions and were so inexperienced that they initially refused to fight, until cajoled by the 27-year-old Captain Keeley. The rebels' plan was to sneak up on the gendarmerie post on a hill about 1,000 metres north of Mirbat, take out the defenders, and then move swiftly into the town itself. At 5 a.m, the still of the dark Arabian night was shattered by gunfire up on the hill. Hopelessly outnumbered, the gendarmerie post was overrun, but that brief firefight had alerted the British Army training team inside the town. There, Captain Mike Keeley ordered his mortar to fire onto the hill whilst positioning his men behind their sandbag defences. One of the SAS defenders, Sergeant Labalaba, a 30-year-old Fijian serving in the British Army, recognised immediately that the key to holding the town was a 25-pound artillery piece positioned outside the fort and supposedly manned by an Omani crew. However, with complete silence from the gun, Labalaba realised something was seriously wrong. He now sprinted through the open ground over 400 metres to the gun pit, which he found deserted. Despite the World War II artillery piece normally requiring a team of 4 to 5 to operate, the Fijian began to operate the gun single-handed, managing to fire it at a rate of 1 round a minute, an incredible feat under any circumstances, but especially under growing fire from the rebels. It was now 5:30 a.m, and the dawn was lighting up the landscape so that the defenders could see just how outnumbered they were. Keeley ordered his machine gun to open up. Over in the gun pit, Laba, as he was known to his comrades, was still firing away by himself. Suddenly, he was hit in the jaw, and he radioed back to Captain Keeley, "I've been chinned, but I'm okay." Hearing that message, Keeley ordered another Fijian in their small team, Trooper Takavesi, to go over to support the firing of the gun. He now ran nearly 800 metres under heavy fire and leapt into the gun pit. There he found Sergeant Labalaba with a shattered jaw. And still, the veteran of Britain's wars in Borneo and Aden continued to fire his gun. Takavesi now ran over to the fort, once more under fire, and found some Omani troops taking shelter. One of them, a gunner by the name of Walid Khamis, ran back with him to operate the gun. Racing back once more under fire, Takavesi cleared the bags to land in the pit, but as Khamis came over, he was hit in the stomach. As he writhed on the floor in agony, Takavesi was now hit in the shoulder. Nevertheless, the two injured Fijian soldiers now worked together to continue firing the gun. The insurgents were now so close that Labalaba and Takavesi were firing at point-blank range. And then, as the sergeant went to grab a mortar, he was mortally wounded in the neck. The 25-pound gun finally fell silent. Realising that the gun was the only thing keeping the hundreds of attackers at bay, Captain Keeley and Trooper Tommy Tobin now raced across the killing ground. As Tobin, who was an SAS medic, tended the wounded, he was shot in the face. The insurgents came within 100 metres of the fort walls. Some had started flanking manoeuvres to try coming round the sides of the position. The SAS troopers, working in pairs, rotated through the exposed firing positions to maintain a constant rate of fire. They were reaching a critical point. Ammunition was running so low that troopers were reportedly sharing spare magazines between firing positions, passing them hand to hand under fire. A wounded Omani soldier reportedly crawled back to a firing slit to continue to fight with one arm. At approximately 9 a.m, 2 RAF Strike Master jets arrived, summoned by radio earlier in the battle. Their appearance was a turning point. The jets carried rockets and machine guns and began strafing the hillsides and ridgelines from which the PFLO had launched their attack. Rebel fighters were scattered, positions destroyed, and their momentum broken. The survivors retreated, dragging wounded comrades with them. Some attempted to regroup in the hills, but the opportunity had passed, and the British and Omani position at Mirbat had held. By 10 a.m, the battle was over. The defenders emerged battered, bloodied, but victorious. In the aftermath, over 40 insurgents were confirmed killed, with many more likely wounded or missing. On the defending side, 2 SAS men, Labalaba and Tobin, were dead, and several others seriously wounded. A further 9 Omani troops had died in the action. And whilst they were not the only defenders, It is fair to say that the SAS provided the backbone for the defence and inspired their allies to keep fighting, especially the Pakistani troops. And together, this scratch force held off a superior, well-armed and highly trained enemy for 4 hours. No wonder people have compared the Battle of Mirbat to the defence of Rorke's Drift during the Zulu War. Word of the defence spread quickly through the armed forces and into the political circles in Muscat and London, and although it remained a relatively low-profile event in the public domain at the time, in part due to the secrecy surrounding the SAS operations, it was seen internally in Oman as a demonstration that the counterinsurgency strategy was working. For the SAS regiment, it underscored the regiment's reputation as a force multiplier, capable of holding its ground against vastly superior numbers through tactical ingenuity, professionalism, and raw courage. The failed assault on Mirbat marked a decisive moment in the Dhofar Rebellion. It exposed the vulnerabilities of the PFLO and bolstered the confidence of the Sultan's forces and their allies. It had been an attempt to reinvigorate the insurgency, but it turned out to be something akin to the Battle of the Bulge, an attempt to reverse a deteriorating military situation, which actually ended up speeding up that decline. From 1973 onward, the rebels found themselves increasingly on the back foot. Iranian troops helped push PFLO fighters out of key positions, while SAS-led clear-cut units gained dominance in the mountains. Government development projects were expanding rapidly, also undercutting the PFLO's appeal among the civilian population. By 1975, the PFLO had been driven out of most of Dhofar, and their communist backers like China and the Soviet Union gave up on them. The border with South Yemen was increasingly sealed off, and their leadership became isolated. By 1976, the rebellion was effectively over. Some remnants of the PFLO lingered on in exile, but they never again posed a serious threat to the Omani state. In the years that followed, Oman underwent a remarkable transformation. Under Sultan Qaboos' leadership, the country evolved from a neglected backwater into a stable, modern and outward-looking state. Infrastructure expanded across the country, education became widespread, healthcare improved, and new cities emerged from what had once been remote settlements. Today, Oman remains one of the most stable nations in the Middle East. And though Sultan Qaboos passed away in 2020, his legacy continues through his successor. Oman maintains strong diplomatic and military ties with the United Kingdom. Omani officers regularly attend Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, British officers continue to serve in advisory roles, and joint training exercises are held regularly between the two nations' armed forces. And as for the men of Mirbat, their actions became legend within the Special Air Service. Captain Mike Keeley was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his leadership during the battle. Tragically, he died in 1979 during a training exercise on the Brecon Beacons. 2 further men from B Squadron 22 SAS were awarded military medals, and one a Distinguished Conduct Medal. Sergeant Labalaba, whose courage at the 25-pounder gun saved the garrison, was posthumously mentioned in dispatches, although many to this day believe he should have received the Victoria Cross. It seems that a possible reason why he wasn't was because the British government at the time were keen not to draw attention to what was a covert operation. In 2018, a statue of this hero was unveiled at the SAS headquarters in Hereford. The Battle of Mirbat is not just a tale of heroism. It helped tip the balance in a wider conflict that could have changed the face of the Gulf. In holding the line at Mirbat, the SAS did not just win a battle, they helped secure a nation's future. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story of an incredible battle in the barren rocks of Arabia. And if you wish to support the show, either as a patron, supporter, or as a one-off gift, there are links below. Thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I look forward to sharing more stories from British history with you very soon.